Lovely viewers, Lee Min-ho stood at the podium of the Korean Culture and Art Awards and called Song Hye Kyo his God's gift. Not in the private domestic world where the most significant things between them have always lived. Not in the quiet, unhurried, entirely unglamorous form of the ordinary morning or the family walk or any of the domestic interior moments where the most real and the most genuinely personal expressions of their private life together have always belonged. At a podium, with a microphone, in a room full of cameras and the most significant figures in Korean culture and art assembled to witness the most prestigious recognition occasion in the industry. He called her his God's gift, publicly, with the full, unmanaged, entirely genuine quality of something that arrived from the interior before the professional surface had been given adequate time to shape it into the more carefully calibrated form that the professional occasion would typically produce from a man at his level of industry prominence receiving a significant cultural award. The words arrived before the management layer. In the specific, direct, entirely uncontained form of the most honest interior of a man who has been building the most private and the most genuinely real marriage in Korean entertainment across all the seasons of its mostly private existence and who arrived at the most prestigious cultural podium available, at the moment when the honest interior was simply too large and too full and too completely real to be adequately contained by any professional register the occasion offered. He said it, God's gift, about Song Hye Kyo, at the Korean Culture and Art Awards. And the room went entirely, completely, and in the most permanently altering way possible silent. Lovely viewers, God's gift. Those two words from that specific man at that specific podium about that specific woman are going to settle into the Minkyo community and into the broader internet and into every person who encounters them with adequate context for the full weight of what they contain in a way that no previous public statement in the entire history of the Minkyo story has settled. Not because they are the most eloquent or the most articulately constructed expression of feeling that the professional vocabulary of Korean entertainment makes available to people who live within it, and who have occasion to deploy it in professionally significant contexts. Because they are the most honest, the most directly primary, the most completely, without any remainder, from the interior of the person who said them rather than from any external calculation about what the occasion required him to say. He said the thing that the interior required him to say, at the most significant cultural podium available, and the interior required him to say those two words about that specific person. God's gift. Like this video right now. Subscribe to this channel and turn on every notification because what Lee Min-ho said at the Korean Culture and Art Awards is the most direct and the most complete and the most entirely primary public declaration about the interior of the Minkyo marriage that the story has ever produced from the person at its center. And every dimension of what it means and what it reveals connects to every other piece of the accumulation in ways that only make their full and devastating sense if you have been here for all of it. Stay with me. Every word matters. The Korean Culture and Art Awards is not an ordinary industry occasion, and the distinction between it and the ordinary industry occasions that both Lee Min-ho and Song Hye Kyo navigate regularly in the professional dimension of their shared public lives matters before any word of what happened within it can be properly received. It is the specific occasion that the Korean cultural establishment has designated as the most significant single recognition of extraordinary contribution to Korean culture and art across the full breadth of the industries and disciplines that constitute the creative cultural life of the country. Not the entertainment industry's recognition of its own most commercially successful figures. The cultural establishment's recognition of the people whose work has contributed most genuinely and most significantly to the ongoing vitality and the international significance of Korean culture as a living, evolving, globally consequential creative force. The award that Lee Min-ho received at the Korean Culture and Art Awards on this particular evening was not simply the industry's acknowledgement of a successful career. It was the cultural establishment's designation of a specific person's work as having reached the level of genuine, lasting, culturally significant contribution that the most serious and the most consequential cultural recognition is designed to honor. The weight of the occasion was different from the weight of the industry occasions. More formal, more historically significant, more completely outside the specific, managed, professionally calibrated dimension of the entertainment industry's ordinary recognition infrastructure. And in the specific conditions of this more formal and more historically significant occasion, Lee Min-ho stood at the podium with something that the professional surface of his ordinary industry appearances has always successfully contained, and that the formal solemnity of the most significant cultural occasion in Korean art and culture simply did not have adequate infrastructure to contain. He stood at the podium. And what he said was not what the occasion had designated as the appropriate content for the speech of a recipient of the most significant cultural award in Korean art. What he said was what the interior required him to say. And what the interior required him to say was about Song Hye Kyo. He began conventionally. This is the detail that makes what followed carry the specific weight it carries, because the conventional beginning is the professional surface operating at its expected capacity, and the departure from the conventional into the interior is therefore all the more clearly marked when it occurs. He began with the appropriate acknowledgments. The cultural institution, the selection committee, the colleagues whose collaborative work contributed to the body of achievement being recognized. He was in the professional register. The specific, managed, appropriate register of a man at his level of cultural prominence receiving a significant cultural recognition and producing in response the specific, professionally calibrated form of gratitude and acknowledgement that the register requires. He was doing that competently, in the specific, easy, long-developed form of someone for whom navigating significant professional occasions in the appropriate professional register has been a baseline skill of the working life for 20 years. He was doing all of that. And then something shifted. In the middle of a sentence about what the work has meant and what the cultural contribution being recognized has been built from across the 2 decades of the career. Something from a different layer arrived in the sentence before the sentence had been completed in its professional form. The interior arrived. In the fraction of a second between one word and the next. Before the professional surface had been given adequate notice that the interior was coming, and that the appropriate professional management of its arrival needed to be organized before it reached the microphone. The interior arrived. And what it said, arriving at the microphone in the specific, direct, entirely unmanaged form of the most honest thing available to the most honest interior of Lee Min-ho in the most formally significant cultural occasion of his career, was Song Hye Kyo's name. And then the 2 words. My God's gift. The hall fell into complete silence. Song Hye Kyo was in the audience. This is the piece of context that transforms the moment from a significant public statement into the most complete and the most primary and the most genuinely interior piece of real-time Min-kyo evidence that any formal cultural occasion has ever produced. She was there. In the audience. In the specific, composed, professionally present mode that she brings to every significant occasion she attends in the public dimension of her life. And she was watching him. The way she watched him at the Industry Award when she stood before the professional surface had been given adequate time to organize the standing, and her eyes filled before the management layer arrived to calibrate the filling. The way she has always watched him in the significant public moments of his professional life from the position of the person who knows the private dimensions of the person being publicly celebrated most completely and who is therefore, in the public moment of the celebration, feeling the full, private, personally specific weight of what the celebration represents in the context of everything she knows from the interior. She was watching him. And the cameras, positioned for the comprehensive documentation of the most significant cultural occasion in Korean art and entertainment, were watching her. And what the cameras caught on Song Hye Kyo's face in the fraction of a second between Lee Min-ho saying my God's gift, and the audience's recognition of what had just been said assembling itself into the specific, collective, room-wide response that the most genuine and the most unexpected public declarations of private love from private people always produce in the audiences that witness them, was the most direct and the most completely unmanaged expression of Song Hye Kyo's interior response. To being called God's gift by the man she loves at the most prestigious cultural podium in Korean art and entertainment that the cameras have ever captured in any context in the entire history of the story. Her hand went to her chest. Before any decision had been made about the appropriate form of visible response to what had just been said. Before the management layer had been informed that a response was required. Before any of the professional surfaces' sophisticated social management had been given adequate time to intercept what the interior was producing and route it through the appropriate professional channel. Her hand went to her chest. And her face did the thing that Song Hye Kyo's face does when the interior has been reached directly by something too large and too genuinely real to be intercepted before the reaching produces its honest physical response. She held herself together. Barely. with both the composition and the complete lack of composition of someone who is in a formal public space and is receiving from the most formal cultural podium in Korean art the most interior and the most privately significant description of herself that the person who knows her most completely from the inside has ever produced in any public space in any context across the entire history of their shared private life. My God's gift, Lee Min-ho explained. Not in the effusive, romantically declarative form of a public statement designed for maximum emotional impact and widespread media circulation. In the quiet, specific, entirely personal form of someone explaining something that is simply true and that the honest interior required to be said in the presence of the people and the institution whose recognition of the work has made the saying of it appropriate and real. He explained what he meant. From the podium. In the formal occasion. In the private register that arrived at the microphone because the professional register was simply not large enough to contain the whole truth of what he needed to say in the most formally significant moment of his professional life. He said that Song Hye Kyo is the reason the work has always been done from the right place. Not from ambition or external recognition, or any of the professional motivations that sustain careers across the ordinary seasons of working in a demanding industry. From the right place. Private place. The specific, interior, entirely personal place that the domestic world of the shared life has always provided across all the seasons of the marriage. The place where the work is not the career or the industry recognition or the accumulated professional achievement of 20 years of extraordinary effort. The place where the work is the thing you bring home at the end of the working day and set down at the door of the domestic interior, and that exists, from the perspective of the domestic interior, as simply the thing that took you away from the place you most want to be for the time that it required, and that is now, at the end of the working day, simply over. He does the work from that place. From the domestic interior where Song Hye Kyo is the most real and the most genuinely important thing, and where the work is simply the thing that happens outside of it. And doing the work from that place, he said, has produced work that is different from the work that is done from any other place. More genuinely, more present, more fully inhabited by the actual person doing it rather than by the professional surface that the industry can produce with considerable skill but that cannot reach the specific, particular, entirely personal depth that only the genuine interior of a person fully inhabiting their most real and most private self can reach. Song Hye Kyo gives him the place from which the work comes from the right interior. She is the God's gift of the right place. Dear viewers, the hall, which had been silent since the moment the two words were said, remained silent for the duration of the explanation, and then produced the longest standing ovation in the history of the Korean Culture and Art Awards. Then came the moment that no one in the hall had anticipated and that the footage, reviewed in the hours after the ceremony, has produced in every person who has encountered it the specific quality of response that the most genuinely significant Min-kyo moments have always produced. The hall was standing. The applause was the longest in the ceremony's history. And Lee Min-ho, still at the podium, with the most significant cultural award in Korean art in his hands and the most complete and the most genuinely primary public declaration of what Song Hye Kyo is to him in the interior of the private life still in the air of the formal occasion where it had been said, looked for her. In the standing, applauding room, with a specific, directed, entirely private quality of eyes that know exactly where to look and that look there before they look anywhere else in any shared space. He found her, in her seat, still holding herself together, barely, with both hands in her lap and the expression on her face that the watching world has been given access to from the most interior sources across the full history of the story described as the most private and the most genuinely real. He found her. And he said something into the microphone. In the private volume. The cameras caught it from the angle that was close enough. He said, I mean it. Quietly. In the private register. For her ears specifically. With the full, settled, entirely genuine quality of someone saying the simplest and the most true thing available to them to the person it is most true about. Mean it. And Song Hye Kyo, receiving those 3 words from the most formal cultural podium in Korean art and entertainment in the private volume of the man who has been saying the most important things to her in the private volume for all the seasons of the marriage, stopped holding herself together. The tears arrived. The private ones. Before any decision about the appropriate form of visible emotional response in a formal public occasion had been made. Simply arrived. From the interior. In the honest, unmanaged, entirely real form of the most primary emotional response available to a woman who has just been called God's gift by the person who means it most completely in the most formal and the most publicly significant context that the most formal and the most publicly significant occasion in Korean art and entertainment has ever provided. The response to what Lee Min-ho said at the Korean Culture and Art Awards moved through the Min-kyo community with a specific, organic, entirely motivated speed of something that has arrived from the most interior dimension of the most private marriage in Korean entertainment in the most direct and the most publicly primary form the story has ever produced. The community received the account of the podium and the 2 words and the explanation and the private volume of I Mean It and Song Hye Kyo's Tears. And the receiving produced the specific, layered, deeply personal quality of response that the most genuinely significant Min-kyo revelations always generate. The silence first. The longest silence in the community's history of receiving significant Min-kyo evidence. Longer than the silence produced by the Building a Family Answer, or the Contact Saved as My Love, or the Mother's Prayer, or any of the previous most interior pieces of evidence in the entire archive. Longer. Because this was not a piece of evidence from the interior of the marriage surfacing through the private world and reaching the public through the credible channels of insider testimony. This was the person at the center of the marriage standing at the most formal and the most publicly significant podium available and saying the most interior and the most genuinely primary thing about the person he loves most in the public form of the most formal cultural declaration available. Not the interior surfacing through the private channels. The interior at the podium. The microphone. In the formal occasion. In the public form. The most direct. The most complete. The most entirely, without any remainder. From the honest interior of the person saying it. The silence lasted. Then the words came slowly. Then the sharing with the urgent, entirely personal quality of people who have been given something too real and too significant and too genuinely, permanently important to hold alone. Celebrities who were present at the Korean Culture and Art Awards responded through the channels where significant Min-kyo information travels with a consistent quality of people confirming from their own positions of witness what the footage had documented with a completeness that no previous piece of evidence in the story had matched. One celebrated figure who was present in the hall described the moment the 2 words were said as the most genuinely, quietly powerful single moment they had ever witnessed in any formal cultural occasion across the entirety of a long and distinguished career in Korean art. Not the most spectacular. The most genuine. The most directly from the interior. The most completely, without any professional management, simply true. The hashtag appeared simultaneously across the community. My God's gift, it said. And the internet. Reading those 3 words in the context of everything they contained and everything the Min-kyo story had been building toward across every season of its mostly private existence, felt something in the body before the mind assembled its response. Something that is not the rapidly cycling excitement of spectacular celebrity content. Something more interior, more permanently settling. More of the specific, quiet, genuinely overwhelming quality of encountering the most honest and the most complete and the most entirely primary truth available about the most private marriage in Korean entertainment, said publicly from the most formal podium available, in the most direct and the most unmanaged and the most genuinely real form that the interior of the person saying it has ever taken in any public space at any point in the history of the watching. My God's gift. He said it. He meant it. He said so. In the private volume. From the podium. At the Korean Culture and Art Awards. And the award was on the kitchen table the next morning. Beside the breakfast. And Song Hye Kyo was at the table. In the ordinary domestic morning. With the expression that the inner circle person who described the morning identified with the quiet precision of someone who has seen this expression before in the private domestic world of the marriage, and who recognizes it immediately for what it is. She was glowing. Not in the spectacular, externally visible way. In the quiet, settled, entirely interior way of someone who has been called God's gift by the person who knows them most completely from the inside, and who meant it, and who said so from the most formal podium available, and whose meaning of it was real enough and genuine enough, and completely enough from the honest interior to produce in the person it was about the specific quality of quiet, settled, entirely private glow that the ordinary domestic morning of the day after the most significant cultural evening of the shared life was still, simply and completely carrying. She was glowing. At the kitchen table. Beside the breakfast. With the award. In the ordinary morning. God's gift. Will. The morning after. Always. Disclaimer. This video is created for entertainment purposes. The story is based on fan discussions, online speculation, and unconfirmed reports. It should not be taken as verified fact. Please wait for official announcements from the actors, their agencies, or the production team before treating any rumors as confirmed.